Sicha. Here we go. Okay. So this is a talk from Shabbos Bechukosai, the 22nd of the month of Iyar, in the year 1962, which is Tafshin Chaf Beis. I just want to point out that tonight's class is L'ilui Nishmas Eliezer ben Eliyahu, and also wish condolences or offer condolences to my brother-in-law Seifa, who just lost his mother, Mrs. Mirazov, and Neshama having Aliyah. Okay, so the Rebbe says like this: Ala pasuk Bechukosai telechu isa b'sifra. So the beginning of the parsha Bechukosai starts off in Bechukosai telechu. If you're going to walk in my commandments. So the Sifra says, or my chukim, we'll see what that means in a second. V'huvagam pirsh Rashi. So the Sifra, the Medrash says in Spratan and Rashi, Yachol ze kiyam hamitzvahs. One would think that when it says Bechukosai telechu, you're going to walk in my ways, in my chukim is referring to the commandments. But then the pasuk, the verse continues, and you will watch my commandments. So then, what is Bechukosai telechu? What does it mean to walk in my chukim? So harikima mitzvahs omer. So we already talked about the keeping the mitzvahs. Amani mekayim b'chukosai telechu. So like Rashi quotes the Sifra, what does this mean if you're going to walk in my chukim? So generally the word chukim is a reference to mitzvahs. Some types of the mitzvahs are called chukim, which are mitzvahs that are engraved in stone, that this is the way it is, don't ask any questions. So the Sifra answers, it's referring to shetihiyu amal Torah. A person has to be toiling in the teachings of Torah, in the studying of Torah. Okay, so then the Rashi who quotes the Sifra is telling us that when the Torah tells us, you're going to walk with my chukim, that is referring to that a person should toil in Torah. Not just to study, but toil. So we have to understand. If you wanted to say that the verse that says, if you're going to walk in my chukim, is referring to mitzvahs, which seems to be the translation, if not for the question and the point that the Sifra points out, quoted by Rashi, mitzvahs, like he says, you would think it means fulfilling my commandments. So then we would say, what does it mean? Why does it use the words? Why does it use the reference Bechukosai with my chukim? To teach us that also the commandments that are in the groups of edus mishpatim. You know, there's three groups of commandments. There's the commandments that fall under the category of chukim, which means we do them because that's what God said. We don't understand them. Edus, there's certain mitzvahs that are mitzvahs that we wouldn't figure out on our own, but God tells us these are mitzvahs that make sense as a testimony of our being Jewish and are fulfilling God's mitzvahs, and mishpatim are the mitzvahs that are logical. So if we would say Bechukosai telechu is referring to mitzvahs, we would say the message the Torah is telling us is sheyesh lahem tam, that even the mitzvahs that have reasons for them, a person doesn't fulfill the mitzvahs because logically it makes sense to them, and therefore the person fulfills the mitzvah. So then that would make sense. So the reason why the Torah is telling us is to give us a message that the reason, the attitude and the how of what we do in a mitzvah, the mindset of what we do in a mitzvah is not because of the logic, but because we accept the yoke of God. This is what God wants us to do. However, because according to the Sifra, the Medrash tells us that the Torah is not telling us about fulfilling the mitzvahs, because that we have in the second part of the verse. It's telling us about toiling in Torah. You should toil in Torah. So if we're talking about Torah, why does the Torah use the word Bechukosai, which is as if to point out that these are my commandments, or this is what I want you to do. Don't ask any questions. Why do we have to apply that to the studying of Torah? The whole point of Torah is the logic. To understand, you can't study Torah without understanding what you're learning. The obligation a person has in toiling in Torah. Not only to know, the obligation up to the limit of what you are able to not only know the details of how to perform the mitzvah, but to best of your understanding, to understand the depth and the reasoning behind the mitzvahs. That's the idea of studying Torah. It could be the performance of the mitzvah is not based on logic, but when you study the mitzvah, it has to be based on understanding the best of your knowledge, the logic of the mitzvah. As much as is explained to us in the written and the oral Torah. Although there are certain mitzvahs that are beyond our understanding, the mitzvahs that fall into the category of chukim, that we can't understand. And regarding the mitzvahs that God says, these are chukim. God says, this is my commandment, this is what I want you to do. And you don't have permission to question them, meaning to question the logic behind the mitzvah. That's only there's only a small amount of the mitzvahs fall under the category of that they have no logic. But the majority of the Torah was given that we should understand, even if we don't understand the initial reason behind the mitzvah. But once God says, sit in a sukkah, right? We would never think about sitting in a sukkah, but once God explains us about the sitting in the Sukkah that you should know and connect to the idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim, so that you're applying the understanding of what the purpose of the mitzvah was. And we see clearly in the Torah that the way Torah the way the written Torah, which is all about the reading of the Torah, that's much smaller than the oral Torah, which is the logic of the Torah. We know the law is that even a person who's common, who does not understand what he or she is studying, makes the bracha of Birchas Torah. Why? Because the actual reading of the Torah Shebiksav is a mitzvah. Is he harbi yesek tanim bekamis mit Torah shebapem? Nevertheless, the written Torah is much smaller than the oral Torah. Right? The written Torah is in 5 books of Chumashim, and the oral Torah is limitless of how many publications of Torah Shebapem we have: Mishnah, Talmud, Medrash, etc., etc., etc. Rishonim, Achronim, Shulchan Aruch. And how do we learn Torah Shebapeh? We have to use our logic. Not it's so much so that it's conditional. That if you don't understand what you're learning, you can't make the blessing of Torah. If someone were to open a Talmud or a Mishnah and just read the words, you don't make a bracha of Torah because you're just reading words. You don't understand what you're saying. No one's saying that there's no value there, but you can't make brachas of Torah. The bracha that you have to study Torah has to be to understand what you're studying. The Rebbe adds to that. The difference between the volume of the written Torah and the oral Torah is a huge difference. We have a very defined amount of verses that's in the Torah. We don't add to the verses of the Torah. That's what's given to us from Moshe Rabbeinu in the original Torah that was given to us and stayed like that for the past 3,500 years. An exact amount of osios, how many letters there are. You can't add anything to that. When it comes to the oral Torah, what we have now is only what's been given to us so far. But in the potential of the Torah and the written Torah, in the oral Torah. And as it's being added more and more and more, constantly upgrading, so to say, the publications of the laws, applying the laws with the new technologies, etc., etc. What a student could come and figure out in the insights of Torah is limitless. Within Torah itself, even within the written Torah, the parts that are not understood, that the Torah doesn't explain, the parts of the written Torah that address the mitzvahs that are called chukim, the mitzvahs that we're not supposed to question. Even in the written Torah, they're less than the parts of the Torah that deal with the logical mitzvahs. So back to question number 1. If, according to the Sifra, brought down by Rashi, that the opening verse of the second parsha this week, is talking about how one studies Torah, because the Torah continues, which means to say we can't be talking about the mitzvahs, we have to be talking about something else. What are we talking about? The toil in Torah. Why do we choose the language of Bechukosai? When it comes to studying Torah, Torah is basically a logical study. Why do we use the word Bechukosai, which indicates Kabbalah's all, don't question, when it comes to studying Torah? There's only a small part of the Torah. Yuvan will understand this. From the Kutei Torah of this week, not the part we learned this week, but another part in the Kutei Torah that says Shebichukaisai milashin chakika. The word chukaisai from the word of chakika means to engrave. A concept that Alter Rebbe discusses the difference between engraved letters, like the letters on the luchos, on the tablets, and written letters like ink on parchment. What is the uniqueness? What's the value? Or so to say, why are engraved letters better than, so to say, written letters, ink on parchment? It expresses itself, the uniqueness of engraved letters. There's two things. One thing is that the letters are part of whatever it's being engraved into. If it's a stone, it's part of the stone. It's not something separate from the stone. Ink on the parchment remains parchment, and the ink is on top of the parchment. But engraved stones are part of the actual stone. Engraved letters in a stone are part of the actual stone itself. The Rebbe says aside for that, you could even find that uniqueness with regular letters. Because although the ink is something addition to the parchment, nevertheless, although it's not 100% one, it still becomes one. Now, when you open up a piece of parchment or a printed piece of paper, you see the letters part of the paper, part of the parchment. So it's not just that it becomes one with the parchment or with the stone. That we could also find at least a little bit in letters on ink on parchment. There's another addition here. It's not just that they become one with whatever they're on, but they have no character of their own. When you have engraved letters in a stone, you see letters, you could read something, but they're really no letters. There's pieces lacking from the stone that is engraved, that you see you see stone. The stone themselves become a message of letters. The whole existence, their whole essence is the fact that they're part of this, is the stone or wax, whatever. This is the message if you walk in my chukim, referring to the study of Torah. It's not, the idea is that you have to become like letters are mamish one and have no identity of their own. It's the stone or the wax, whatever it is that's engraved in. That's how a person has to study Torah. Where you have no mitzias of yourself. It's not about you. And the Rebbe explains, the point over here is not the point is not just to say that you have to become one with Torah. Why? Means the idea that a person stays their own identity, that's not the point that the Torah is coming to tell us over here. We'll see what the Rebbe means to say. This idea that we have that says about Torah, of the study Torah of Doeg, which we're learning about in the Talmud now, which is the advisor and enforcer of King Saul. So it says that the Torah by him was like misaf l'chutz from on the outside. That's not the point of the Torah to say that you shouldn't be like Doeg, the Adomi. It's not enough to become one like ink and parchment. When you have ink on parchment, so although right now the ink and parchment are one to give a message of whatever the written message is, that Torah is telling us that's not enough. There's a difference when you become one with something or you nullify yourself to that one thing. Meaning to say, what the Rebbe is explaining over here is when you have ink on parchment, yes, it's one thing together because there's a parchment. We need each other. The parchment and the ink need each other in order to give over the message. Without the parchment, the ink means nothing. And without the ink, the parchment is blank. So because they become one to give a united message. But that's not what Torah demands from a person, to become one with Torah. You should totally nullify yourself to Torah, like the letters engraved in a stone. There is no essence of letters. The whole essence is stone. The Rebbe says, like we find in Moshe Rabbeinu, when our teacher Moshe, the first person to receive and give over the Torah, that he was totally nullified. Moshe, again, you have to be on the level of Moshe to reach that. But in Moshe was able to become so nullified to Torah that though that the parsha of V'hayim Shemaya, which is in Devarim, and Moshe is speaking, and that's why Devarim, when we have the fifth book of the Chumash, Moshe is talking, so he'll say God is going to give this, God's going to give this. But when it comes to the parsha of V'hayim Shemaya, he says, "V'nisati Esav, I'm going to give grain, grass to your animals." How can Moshe say I'm going to give? He's not God. But he's so nullified, he so has no mitzias, no entity of himself. Hey, Aaron, is that he's talking as if God's talking. Seemingly, he's indicating that he's the one giving the grass. God forbid. Well, how can he say Venisati? I'm going to give. Because Moshe was so nullified to the study of Torah that God spoke through the voice, through the gorin, through the throat of Moshe. It's God speaking. Venasati Esav, I'm giving. Moshe, it sounds, you hear the voice of Moshe. It's like it says by Har Sinai, Moshe, right? Moshe, the God was speaking through the voice of Moshe. We find this also about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So it says in Zohar, quotes the Rebbe, quote the Zohar all the time. Chassidus, it quotes the Zohar. That I think we learned it also in it wasn't just in the Zohar, it was in Gemara Sanhedrin, right? Yeah, in Sanhedrin we learned it. Where the Gemara is, where Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says, "V'risi b'nei Aliyah," I saw the people of elevation, and there are very few. And if there's only two, it's me and my son. Right? In Shnayim, there's two, and it's me and my son, his son Eلیעזر. V'im Chadu, there's only one, it's him. So the question, the Rebbe says, how could he speak like that? It seems not proper for a righteous person like Rashbi to talk like himself about himself like that. If there's one great person, it's me. But why was he able to talk like that? He was so nullified to the cause. He was so nullified to God and to Torah that he just said it the way it was. He wasn't talking as if he's talking about himself in a consciousness that he's praising himself. He's literally as if God was talking. That was the truth. That he was. If there was one bnei Aliyah, it was him. His whole entity, his whole being was godliness. Bitul de chakika, the nullification, as if something that's engraved in a stone. Based on what we said many times, that we have to understand and try to unite all the different interpretations of an idea that's on Torah, right? We have many different ideas that the Torah means this, the Torah means that, according to this commentary, that's commentary. Rashi would say Lashon Hara, or another idea. So how do you connect all the ideas together? Moving, Shapir Admar Zakin. This idea that the Alter Rebbe says that Bechukosai means chakika, something that's engraved. Matim im apir shapash b'chukosai lashon chukim. It's also connected, not just the idea of chakika, that it's engraved, meaning you have to become, you're totally nullified, like the letters that are engraved are totally nullified to the stone. What does it mean totally nullified? For instance, give an idea. Hypothetically, if you were to take a razor and carefully scrape off a letter from the parchment, you could separate it. It's separated. It means it's ink that's on a parchment. Questions, how does it work with print today or computer? But we won't get there. But it's ink on parchment. But when you have a stone, there's no letter outside the stone. There's nothing. It's just a carving. Either you carve the letters out to protrude outwards, or you carve inwards. But there is nothing there. It's all stone. Either the stone creates a space for a letter, or the actual stone is the letter. But there's nothing outside of the stone. That's what means totally nullified. So this idea that Alter Rebbe says to carve in. Matim also goes with the idea that chukaisai means the mitzvahs that are chukim, which you're not supposed to question. But what's the connection? When a person studies Torah, one has to Torah study in the way of chukim. What's that mean? Mitzat Kabbalah Sol. You have to mean this is an idea that I think the Rebbe explains and Chassidus explains many times. There's the idea of v'nafshi kafel kol tia, total bittul. I'm like dirt to everyone. Shach libi b'sar sech, and now open my heart to Torah. The foundation of Kabbalah Sol allows a person to actually explore Torah limitlessly, because as long as it's about you, you have an ageh b'davar. You're kind of pushing an agenda. If you're able to separate self from the study of Torah, you're literally liberating your mind to understand things without limits. So if when a person studies mitzat Kabbalah's oil, yes, we need to understand the Torah. Even the understanding of Torah itself. The reason we have to understand Torah is because God said so. It's not because I enjoy studying it. God wants us to study Torah. And how does He want us to study Torah? That we should use our mind and apply ourselves to understand it. And that's what it means to toil in Torah. The toiling is shemisyageya bilimudai. What does it mean to toil in your studying? More than your nature would demand, more than your a studious character would demand. Because as long as a person enjoys something, or the person he or she is a student of the subject, so you go as far as the character of your study is, or your enjoyment is. But when you're toiling in Torah, amala means to toil. Toil is pushing yourself. It's because God wants us to do it like that. So you're pushing past your nature, past your enjoyment, past what your natural, how much you would naturally apply yourself to a subject. When it's about how much you enjoy the study. So you measure how much enjoyment you have, right? When you close something, you say, okay, I'm getting bored of this subject now. You close it. So why were you learning it up until now? Because you did enjoy it. So as soon as you don't enjoy it anymore, you close the book. That's about you. That's not called toiling. Toiling, you push it, forcing yourself. I mean, again, obviously, to limits, you don't want to go overboard. There's certain times, and you have to know certain moments your mind closes down and you study something lighter. That's normal. But the idea is it's not about you're studying, you're approaching a subject because of the student within you or because of the enjoyment you have of the study, and therefore it's limited to, it's measured up until as far as that goes. This is the connection between the idea of chukim, that the mitzvah, we're talking about chukim, mitzvahs that are demand Kabbalah Sol, and the idea that mitzvah, the chukim means engravement, totally nullifying your mitzias, your entity to Torah. And a person studies Torah in such a way that's not about your enjoyment or about the kind of student you are, but you're amalim with Torah, you're toiling in Torah because you're accepting Torah because of Kabbalah Sol, the yoke of Torah. And this is and God wants you to study Torah, and God wants you to apply your talents in studying into Torah. That is how you become a person that becomes nullified to Torah. You are the letters. The letters and the stone is one. You become one like letters engraved in the stone, not like letters that are written on a parchment.
So what about, in Bechukosai, where it basically says, if you walk in my ways, but then it do the mitzvot, it's distinguishing those two things, or it's saying the same thing. The mitzvot are like the chukim, or they're different from the chukim?
You came in a drop a minute after we started. That's the whole foundation of the beginning of the talk. Is that the Rashi quotes the Sifra, the Medrash, that says that I would think Bechukosai telecho means the mitzvos. But the very fact that the pasuk continues ves mitzvosai tishmaru, like you just pointed out, means we're not talking about the mitzvahs, because the mitzvahs is in the second statement. So what's Bechukosai telechu? So the Sifra says toiling in Torah. the Torah part of it, the studying Torah, the limud HaTorah versus the action of mitzvahs, right? We have Talmud Torah and mitzvahs. So in the toiling of Torah, you have to toil in such a way of chukim, although the word chukim is usually applied to mitzvahs, but here we're saying that your way of approaching Torah, which is the combination of what the Alter Rebbe says, that you become one with Torah, like letters that are engraved, and you have Kabbalah's all in your studying, in your attitude of how you study Torah, that makes a person become one with Torah. So we're talking about the studying of Torah. The part of the mitzvahs is the continuation of the verse.
So the distinction between the first part of the sentence and the second part is one is studying Torah and the other is doing mitzvahs.
Exactly.
It's the verbs, but the verbs studying versus doing.
Exactly. So the question is, why would we use the language of chukim when it comes to Torah? So the point is it's teaching us what's the attitude and what's the approach one takes to studying Torah. So now, but the Rebbe continues based on the teachings of the Alter Rebbe. What does it mean, the word telechu? You should walk. Halicha, movement. What's the movement we're talking about? An application, how you apply yourself to the studying of Torah has to be in a way of chukim, Kabbalah's oil, chakika, engravement in the Torah. What's the idea of telechu? Telechu would make sense, like Shana just pointed out so well, in the actions of mitzvahs. Well, what's this have to do with the study of Torah? So the Rebbe says halicha, the idea of movement. Movement is when there's stages, different stages. You're moving along in different stages. Like a chain of things. There's a halicha, the chain of events. How the world is and the strength of the people, the different qualities of people within, your mind leads to your heart, etc., etc. This is how a person moves from stage to stage. When it comes to the emotions, for instance, a person could develop their emotions to feel more and more and to be more in tune with their feelings. For instance, in love for God, you could have a small love, like the Tanya talks about, avazuta, and from there you could develop into avarab, into the great love. So that's movement. So to an intellect, you could have seichel katan. You can have the beginning stages of your intellect, to say gadol, to more advanced levels of your intellect. But when we're saying that the word chukim means, it's not about the talents you have or the smarts that you have, but the attitude you have in Torah, that your attitude has to be of Kabbalah soul. What's the movement of Kabbalah soul? What is the movement of self-nullification? Which we said is Kabbalah's oil. Means if you want to say that that you keep on developing your studying of Torah, that would make sense. But here we're talking about the reason we use the word chukim is not about the actual smarts or the sechel of Torah, but the attitude that you take to Torah, which is bittul and Kabbalah soul. So what's the halicha in that? Seemingly, it's either you're there or not, right? How could you grow in accepting the yoke? In the Admir Zakim Varba Torah, the Alter Rebbe explains in the Kutei Torah, that the telechu is also the reward. What is, means the Alter Rebbe always, as we've studied over the years, the Alter Rebbe, the beauty of the Alter Rebbe, how he divides and translates a pasuk, a verse. So what is the idea of, what is the reward of Bechukosai, right? The Alter Rebbe puts a pause there, not Bechukosai telechu. Bechukosai, if you're going to be amal in b'Torah, if you're going to toil in Torah, in the way of Kabbalah soul, accepting the yoke, in the way of bittul, you're going to become one with the stone, then the reward is telechu. You're going to have movement in your life. Halicha mit is true movement. The true definition of movement is not just to be able to move from point A to point B, but to have limitless amount of movement. But that's what Alter Rebbe explained. But the way one simply translates the pasuk, like I said, Alter Rebbe is machadish that in the pasuk. They put the comma after Bechukosai is a chidush. So to say, as you learn in school, as in preschool. Im Yaldi Yisrael, with children, that when you want to know the reward of studying Torah, it says you can have rain in its time, you can have all the blessings of the parsha. Kol habrachas shebeparsha. Seemingly, the word telechu is not a reward. It's part of the avoda. Like I said, Bechukosai telechu, the literal translation is that you should walk in my ways, so to say, walk in my Torah. But not that to be walking is itself a reward. So the Rebbe says, you can understand this and apply this to the mitzvah that we're doing now, which is the counting of the Omer. Sfiras Omer. Like we learned before, the main part of the mitzvah Sfiras Omer is connected to the month of Iyar. In all the days of the month, one has the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer, unlike Nisan and Sivan, that only has a few days. Although Nisan has more than Sivan, but nevertheless, it doesn't have an entire month. As we mentioned in previous talks, about how we understand mitzvahs within the times that we do the mitzvahs. There's certain mitzvahs we do daily. Mitzvahs Talmud Torah, like for instance, mitzvah of studying the Torah is the mitzvah that a person has to do on a daily basis. Mitzvahs Krishma Tefillah, the mitzvah of Shema and davening is daily. Mitzvahs elu einam shayachas ukshum l'teichrim hamiyuchad shel hayamim shbeim kayim moisam. So, however, when you have a mitzvah that's every day, so you can't say it's specifically. You can't say Torah. The studying of Torah is very unique to Tuesday on the 5th of Iyar, right? Because you have to study Torah every day. So you don't see so much the connection between the mitzvah and the day. The Eish mitzvahs, however, the other mitzvahs, that are very much connected to the days. Very much. For instance, Pesach. Right, so Pesach is very much, and the 15th to the 21st is when we celebrate of the month of Nisan is when we celebrate the holiday of Pesach. Other holidays. But again, these mitzvahs are only certain days of the month. The 7-8 days of Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuos, Hanukkah, etc. Although they're very much connected to the time, but they only take a certain part of the month. Don't take an entire month. What's the chiddush of Sfiras Omer? Which is in the month of Iyar. It's a mitzvah that's very time dependent. You can't count the Omer in the month of Teves. And it's every day of the month. Means it's a mitzvah that's very time sensitive, and it's time sensitive connected every day. Even though we say Elul, like we learned, the Alter Rebbe asks in the famous Maimer, Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li, why is not the whole month of Elul a holiday based on Melech Besada, based on the idea of the 13 attributes of mercy? Is because of it. That's the whole idea. That should be a common month, but still doesn't have the mitzvah. There's no mitzvah in the Torah in Elul. I mean, the idea of getting ready for Rosh Hashanah, of course, is always a mitzvah. Tshuva is a mitzvah, but a person Kol Yom Aviyah b'Tshuva, every day you have to be in Tshuva. It's an auspicious time for tshuva. But here you have a mitzvah that's mamish connected to every single day of the month. Like my b'chodesh Nisan, Sivan, and month of Sivan and Nisan that have the month that also have a time sensitive connection to Sfiras Omer, but doesn't take up the whole month. Mitzvah the Sfiras Omer ain't b'choy me'chodesh. It's not every day of the month. B'chelkom levad, only part of the month is connected to the mitzvah. Hainish b'choy yomi me'chodesh mekayim mitzvah. The Rebbe says every day we have a unique mitzvah. And every day of the month we can perform it. And every day, it's not just one continuous mitzvah. Every day itself is a mitzvah of counting that night of the Omer. And he says, first of all, like this, you can't say that the sphere of all the 49 days of the counting is one mitzvah. Not that every day itself has a mitzvah. And therefore, if you're missing one day, you miss the mitzvah, because if you forget to count over a mess less over a period of the day, then no longer could you make the bracha. But then the question is, then if it's one mitzvah, why do we make a blessing every night? It's one mitzvah. And that adds key. And if you're doing one mitzvah, the Alter Rebbe clearly says you can't make blessings over and over again. So here, if the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer is one mitzvah, and you're trying to prove that it's one mitzvah because if you miss one night, you can't continue counting, but still, why do we make a blessing every night? And the Rebbe says, it continues, even according to the opinion, not like the Alter Rebbe, that one could make two blessings on one mitzvah. If we don't know for sure if you're going to count all 50 days, 49 days, because you may miss a day. So how could we make a blessing on the first day? We should wait till the last day when you complete all the mitzvah, all the counting, and you know for sure you did the whole mitzvah. If you forget one day, one would think that if it's one mitzvah, and you're saying that you could bless many times in one mitzvah, fine, but you don't know if you're going to do the mitzvah, because if you miss one day, then you have to stop counting. And if it's one mitzvah, then all the days that you counted, you made a blessing in vain. Same reasons brought down halacha when a woman's counting to get to her purity, she doesn't make a bracha on the days of the counting. Because if she becomes impure in those days of counting, so those days weren't counted anymore. You have to start counting again. Another reason, one of the reasons brought down why we don't give we don't make a blessing for tzedakah. What happens if the poor person says, forget it, never mind, I don't need the money. So then it's not tzedakah, so it's the vatala. There's another reason that Rebbe once said, we don't make a bracha in tzedakah because until the person is going to make the blessing, the ani standing there waiting, he needs the money. Therefore you have to say, so the Rebbe's point is that every single day of Sfiras HaOmer is a Sel Mitzvah. Nevertheless, if you miss one day, and you can't continue to count with a blessing. Because the counting itself has to be complete. So the Rebbe wants to explain something. He's not going to go into more depth into that concept of the each day being a mitzvah and its completeness. It means it's a part every single day, 49 days, but they have to all be together, united as 49 days. Although it's not considered levatala if you forget to count. Ubir Akesher, the point is, what is the connection of mitzvah Sfiras HaOmer this year to year? Why taka the Sfiras HaOmer have the month of Iyar have every day that mitzvah? Yedua She'ir, we know that it's known that the month of Iyar is the Rashi Tevis. The opening letters of Iyar is Aleph Yud Yud Reish, which is Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Rachel. Right, the three fathers and the mother Rachel. That's known halachically, that when you write very important documents, like for instance, God forbid, a divorce, that everything has to be written exactly. We spell the month of Iyar with two yuds, not one yud. You can spell it with one yud. So very much because it's connected. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Rachel. Shem Dal Draglim Akava. These are the four parts, the four feet of the chariot. Why do we put in the four parts of the chariot to the month of Iyar? We don't find it in the other months, like Sivan, when there was the giving of the Torah. One would think that the month of Sivan is connected to the Merkava, to the chariot, because when God came to give the Torah, that's the vision of Yecheskel, is the vision of the chariot, like it's brought down in Chazal. Or Chodesh Nisan, where there's the month of Yetzias Mitzrayim, also great revelations. Why do we have the Merkava that is a concept of a revelation in the month of Iyar specifically? In the month of Nisan, when God redeemed the Jewish people, God himself came down, so to say, with his chariot. One would think. But this idea of seeing, every male has to go see in the holiday. There's no obligation to go see in the month of Iyar. It's just like you want to see. They saw godliness. That's like the revelation of the chariot. So why does Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Rachel, which represent the 4 feet of the chariot, have to do with Iyar specifically? And why does every month of Iyar have a mitzvah of counting the Omer? But the idea is, what does it mean, the chariot? What's a chariot mean? The definition in Torah, when we talk about chariot in Chassidus, the idea of the chariot is the bittul, right? We say Avram was a chariot. What do it mean Avram was a chariot to guard? The guard is just like a chariot doesn't make decisions. The rider decides how the chariot runs, where the chariot goes. So too, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Rachel, they were totally nullified like a chariot to the rider, to Hashem. So what does it mean, the chariot in the service of God? That's the idea of the nullification a person has to God. Just like a wagon, a chariot is nullified to the rider. Shezui Klaus Avodas B'Mata L'Mayla. That's our avodah that we, from above, from below up, go to Hashem, give our bittul to God. Bittul hamerkava l'roichav. So to say, the chariot nullifies itself to the rider. V'chein inyan hamerkava. Therefore, therefore, specifically, we don't have the Markava in Sivan and Nisan, which is when we leave Mitzrayim and receive the Torah. That's the way God comes down to the Jewish people. And that's not an avodah. It means to become a chariot comes work on your own. You have to work on yourself. And that's what happens in the month of Iyar. We work on ourselves. We work on our character to become a chariot to God. All the holidays is a revelation from above down. Even though you want to see it comes, or to be seen, but the main thing is the revelation. Is the revelation of the rider, not so much the bittul, the nullification of the merkava, of the chariot. And the Indian merkava, this idea that we work on ourselves to become a chariot for God, which is what the Rebbe is going to connect. That's the idea of Bechukosai. It's in the month of Iyar. Every day in Tzvir. What's the counting of the Omer? I'm fixing this part of my character, this part of my midos, this part of my midos. You have to make sphira, you have to make counting also from the word usfartim lashon sphira, so be brighten yourself, polish your character. Like a sapphire. You have to make the you, lechem, the character, to be bright. The Rebbe says in Yiddish, make yourself a source of light. Because it's all about your work. And every single day, without change, every day you're working on another part of your character. It's not like the month of Nisan that we only start working on ourselves after the revelation, which is halfway through the month, or Sivan, which is only till the beginning of the revelation of Torah. And after the blowing of the shofar on the 6th or the 7th of Sivan, so to say, the revelation stops. And Bashenki in the month of Iyar, every day is about brightening yourself, making yourself a chariot to God. Let's go a little further. This idea that the counting of the Omer is from below up, means you're working your character, nullifying the chariot within yourself to the rider, which is God. You count 50 days. We do akushya. The Rebbe says, we know the question, we don't count 50 days, we only count 49 days.
It's from above down, though. It's not from below up. You start with chesed and you end up with malchut. That's above to below.
That's above from below, but you're doing the avodah. It's a very good question, very good point. And there is the idea of both, of counting also the Omer in the other way. But nevertheless, although you're right, you're starting from your higher qualities, going down to your lower qualities, but it's all about refining self to make yourself a chariot to God. But the question is how you approach self, starting from your higher qualities, going down to your lower qualities. A very good question. But nevertheless, it's still all about avodas atzma, svartim lechem. It's about making yourself bright. The question is, how do you approach yourself? You work on your lower qualities first, you enhance your stronger qualities to be able to get to your lower qualities. But it's all a strategy of refining self. So the Rebbe says, V'hinei b'mitzvah sfir soimer. Shemara klos avoid m'matal ma'al. So the question is, why did we say 50 days? You don't count 50 days. So the Rebbe says, it's explained. When a person counts the 49 days, like Sharna very well pointed out, starting from your higher qualities going down. But nevertheless, it's an avodah of refining yourself. Then you're worthy to receive the revelation of the 50th day. You made yourself a vessel to the 50th day. The Rebbe says, the Rebbe says it's not a good enough answer. Because it seems like the Torah says clearly, count 50 days. As if you're counting yourself, not that you've been gifted the 50th day. Clearly, the avodah is to count the 50th gate. Not because you become worthy to the 50th gate. So that just will finish off at this point. We can answer. But the Holy Baal Shem Tov has taught us. Sheshar Chamishim hu chayzer umaschil nun sharm l'mayla mizeh. Sheshar HaChamishim hu chayzer umaschil nun sharm l'mayla mizeh. The Baal Shem Tov says that every time you enter the 50th gate, starts another 50 gates. Is that moving? So from this is understood. The Rebbe says what could be your 50th gate is for the next person the beginning of the 49 gates, because every time you enter the 50th gate, there's no completion. It's like a endless process of 49 gates, and they keep on going 50 gates, another 50 gates. And his 50th gate is much higher. The point that the Rebbe is saying, what does it mean to count 50 days? When you finish your 49 levels, so start now with the next 49 days. We have to understand the answer, but I'm running out of time. So the Rebbe says, what does it mean? That if you continue from the 49th gate into the next 49 gates, so then all of a sudden you look backwards, you realize the 50th gate which was unachievable initially, all of a sudden becomes lowered to be part of your regular gates. Means there's always the 50th gate that you don't have. But the 50th gate, the idea is that you should be so much counting and continuing to grow 50 gates and another 50 gates, that even though you could only achieve the 49 gates, and the 50th gate becomes a gift to you. But once you continue into that and you go further, so what happens is all of a sudden that 50th gate becomes part of your 49 gates, because now what's out of your reach is in a much lower level, because now you're reaching much higher. All right, it's a beautiful Sicha. We have to continue learning the Sicha, I guess, on our own. I have to run now. Thank you much, everyone, for joining. Good Shabbos, good Chodesh, Shabbos V'Rachim this week. Shizachah to Kabbalah Satar B'Simcha B'Pnimis. Laila Tov.